KREM 2 News begins now.
Thank you for joining us on KREM 2 Plus. I'm Tim Pham. This is your KREM 2 News Week in Review. Join us as we take a closer look at some of the biggest stories in the Inland Northwest this past week.
If convicted, Bryan Kohberger will be sentenced to death. In court documents filed this morning, the Latah County prosecutor says the murder of 4 University of Idaho students was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, manifesting exceptional depravity, adding the defendant acted with reckless indifference to human life. Prosecutors had a 60-day window to seek the death penalty after Kohberger's arraignment. The decision comes 3 weeks before the deadline. The state of Idaho has executed 3 people since the 1970s. 8 people are currently on death row. Last December, the state had no choice but to call off the execution of Gerald Pizzuto because the Department of Corrections was unable to get a hold of the lethal injection drugs they needed.
The companies that do make this drug are European countries, and they're no longer willing to sell it to the United States, as they have been for nearly 10 years now.
Beginning July 1st, if lethal injection is not an option, inmates will be executed by a firing squad. Kyle Simchuk, KREM 2 News.
It came as a shock to most of us in the courtroom when we didn't hear several of those motions that we expected to, including one where the defense was asking the judge to compel prosecutors to provide materials related to the grand jury that indicted Kohberger, as well as the defense asking for a potential pause on the proceedings if those materials were turned over. I made calls to a contact with Idaho courts who tells me that both sides are still discussing those issues and an agreement may be reached outside open court. Here's what we did hear in court today. Defense attorney Ann Taylor wants the judge to make prosecutors turn over several pieces of evidence, including the training records of 3 officers who Taylor says had critical involvement in the investigation, like interviewing key witnesses or attending autopsies. The other evidence the defense wants are records from the FBI, specifically related to the suspect's cell phone records. They also want a report from an FBI forensic examiner who guided police to look for a white Hyundai Elantra. Taylor says these are critical pieces to preparing the defense's case.
These are things that we need to have. There is a heightened standard now that the state has filed this notice of intent to seek death.
And they haven't proffered any reason as to why this would be needed for the preparation of their case.
Prosecutors argue the defense has everything the state has, and they're actually still waiting for FBI records themselves. Judge John Judge said he'd take those arguments and look at case law and issue a ruling later on. Now, as for those motions that we didn't hear in court, our contact with Idaho courts says we may not see anything publicly filed on those, depending on what both sides decide. In Moscow, Shannon Mouty, KREM 2 News. KREM 2 News first told you back in February the owner of this house gave it to the University of Idaho so it could be torn down. The university has now started that process against the wishes of some of the victims' families. We're used to relative quiet at the home on King Road. But Thursday, a radio played behind the boarded-up walls as a disaster crew packs up the items left behind. University of Idaho students Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle were killed in the house in November 2022.
They anticipate it will take them a couple of weeks to get all the personal items out.
Jody Walker with the University of Idaho says the prosecution and defense for the man accused of the murders agreed to release the house to the university.
To demolish before school starts, yes.
Fall classes begin August 21st. The suspect in the murder case is expected to go to trial in October.
It's the largest piece of evidence in the entire case.
That's why Shannon Gray, attorney for the Gonzalez family, says his clients are upset a critical piece of the puzzle may be lost.
The families feel like it should be left there until the trial is over.
There's fear, he says, it could still hold necessary evidence or help jurors visualize the case better than photos or 3D models.
If there's any evidence that's brought up in trial that, has to do with vantage points or how you can hear something or how you can see something, or entry points or exit points.
In a letter obtained by KREM 2, an attorney for the university acknowledged the Gonzalezes, Mogans, and Kernodles don't want the house torn down before the case is resolved. But attorney Kent Nelson adds the university needs a legal reason before considering delaying demolition. Does the university have a response to the family's concerns?
The university's been in contact with the families since we took over the ownership of the house in the spring.
The university says leveling the house will be healing for students, the Moscow community, and the victims' loved ones.
It's not healing for the families. And they're the ones that had their children murdered, okay? I'm not sure how the university could take their wishes over those of the victims' families.
Right now, Gray says he's not considering taking legal action to stop the demolition. Walker tells me a demolition date will be set later, but the house on King Road is expected to come down before the semester starts. In Moscow, Shannon Moudy, KREM 2 News.
Tonight, in a 4-3 vote, Spokane City Council members passed an ordinance which increases the penalty for trespassing in parks after hours. That penalty now jumps from a civil infraction to a misdemeanor. All neighborhood parks are closed from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. except Riverfront Park, which closes an hour later. Spokane police say they've seen a significant increase in crime and vandalism across city parks. According to SPD data, between January 2021 and March of this year, there were 29 shootings in 22 different city parks.
If I lived across the street from Franklin Park right now, I would put my house for sale and I would leave. And it's the same for some of these other parks, because whether you want to believe it or not, it is out of control. And if we can give our officers one more tool, and maybe if a call comes in and an officer can approach that person, maybe those officers can stop that shooting before it happens.
Dozens of people spoke out against the ordinance during public comment, saying the law unfairly targets the homeless. Council members Zappone, Beggs, and Wilkerson voted against the ordinance. They do not believe it'll increase safety and could put the city in legal jeopardy. In Spokane, Kyle Simchuk, KREM 2 News.
The first long-term care bill in the United States.
Years after it was passed, the Washington Cares Fund is officially launching. The program aims to make long-term care available to people across Washington state, but how much will it cost you? Noah writes, "My boss said my pay will be lower next month because of a new tax. Is this true?" Let's verify. Our sources are Ben Vecti, director of the Washington Cares Fund, and House Bill 1087. Back in 2019, lawmakers passed legislation that created the Washington Cares Fund, a state-run long-term care insurance program. Washington taxpayers who have contributed to the fund for 10 years can receive a $36,500 lifetime benefit to help pay for long-term care needs. The program is funded by a payroll tax, which goes into effect on July 1st.
It works just like a Medicare or Social Security. You pay in a little bit of every paycheck over your career.
Most workers in Washington will pay a tax of 0.58% of their wages.
So the typical worker is going to pay about $12 a paycheck or $24 a month into WACARES. That's somebody who makes about $50,000 a year. If you make more than that, you'd pay in more. If you make less, you'd pay in less, because it's a percentage of your wages.
So we can verify, yes, most Washington workers will see a deduction in their paycheck starting in July because of a new payroll tax. However, some workers may be eligible for an exemption.
The new types of exemptions are for types of workers who might have had to pay in, but maybe wouldn't have been able to plausibly have a path to being eligible to claim benefits.
Exemptions include workers who live outside of Washington. This could include anyone who lives in Idaho but commutes across the border for work, military spouses and partners, people with a non-immigrant work visa, and veterans with a 70% service-connected disability rating or higher. And it's important to note the exemptions are not automatic. So if you think you're eligible for one, you need to apply as soon as you can. Otherwise, the money will be taken out of your paycheck and you likely will not be able to reclaim it.
The city of Spokane is expanding on incentives offered to home builders in hopes to get more of them to build here. This latest proposal would cut costs for those developers and even renters by cutting parking requirements. Backed by realtors, developers, and affordable housing advocates.
So everybody here realizes the challenge ahead of us.
Spokane City Council members Jonathan Bingle and Zach Sapone unveiled a new solution Monday to meet Spokane's steep housing needs.
It's a one-year pilot program to waive the required parking minimums for residential housing for development within a half-mile of transit.
In other words, instead of requiring builders to add a set amount of parking, the proposed interim ordinance instead allows property owners to choose how much residential off-street parking to provide.
City Council is hearing what we have been saying for 18 months, and that is that we are in a housing crisis.
Cutting out the burden of building more parking will cut added costs to developers, says Zach Sapone.
And a study has shown that the cost of development can increase by up to 15%. That is then passed on to owners and renters. That could be about $20,000 to $45,000 per unit or per house.
Those costs often increase rents for people who don't even own cars, Zapone adds. You likely won't see a lot of change in the first year of the test program. Darren Watkins with the Spokane Association of Realtors says state laws have already readapted to change parking requirements. A city ordinance would just be extra incentive.
But the truth is, it'll be the difference in projects going forward or not going forward.
Anything that helps to bring solutions forward and alleviate the pressure of the supply and demand scenario that we have ourselves in is a win, in our opinion.
If approved, council will evaluate whether developers are taking advantage and possibly make changes if the move goes permanent. A final city council vote on this interim ordinance could happen as early as mid-July. Shannon Mowdy, KREM 2 News.
Traffic is up and gas prices are down as people take to the roads over the holiday week. But before you fill up, here's what you need to know about prices in the inland Northwest. Number 1, Washington has the highest prices in the country. That's right, we're paying more than even California.
But a lot of this happening because of two issues. First and foremost, the cap and trade program that started at the beginning of the year. But there's also some refinery issues in the Pacific Northwest, as well as some areas of the Rockies that have been persistent the last few weeks that are causing prices to be higher.
So, while prices in Washington are hovering around $5 per gallon, the second thing to know is that Idaho prices are significantly lower. Washington drivers may be able to save nearly $1 per gallon by filling up across the border.
So whenever I come to Idaho, I fill up.
Number 3, gas prices are much lower than they were at this time last year. Nationally, prices are down more than $1.30 per gallon. Idaho is seeing similar savings, and while Washington prices are lower, the savings is less than half of what the rest of the country is seeing. And that brings us to the fourth thing to know. Gas Buddy's Patrick DeHaan says prices should drop soon, but maybe not as quickly in Washington.
I would expect by mid to late July, prices should moderate, and that should be a trend that could continue through the fall. But the disconnect between Washington State and its neighbors will probably slowly increase over the course of the summer.
The postcards were mailed out to more than 500,000 Washingtonians, including to KREM 2 viewer Kim, who wrote to the Verify team, I received a postcard from Garcia v. Washington State DOL, postmarked NYC, saying that I might be eligible for up to a $7,500 settlement. Could you please verify? It sounds like a scam. Our sources to verify this are the Washington State Department of Licensing and Kaylee Boyd, an attorney for the law firm Towsley Brain Stevens in Seattle.
And I guess the first question is this postcard legitimate?
It is. They are real, and they contain pretty important information about how to file a claim if you're a class member in the DOL data breach.
The State Department of Licensing announced in January of last year that roughly 650,000 people were impacted by the breach to its professional licensing system. The personal information, including social security numbers of people with active, expired, revoked, and suspended professional licenses, was compromised.
For a certain number of those professions, it kept those licensees' information in a database called Polaris. And in January of 2022, that database was breached by some third-party hacker, and certain licensees' information, actually over 500,000 licensees' information was taken.
Attorney Kaylee Boyd's firm represents clients in the class action lawsuit against the Department of Licensing. She says while the DOL denies any wrongdoing in the breach, they agreed to pay a $3.5 million settlement, which brings us back to the postcards.
Is everyone who gets a postcard, are they eligible to be a part of the settlement?
They are. So if you received a postcard, it means that according to the Washington State Department of Licensing records, you were a person whose personal information was impacted by this data breach.
So we can verify, yes, the postcards from Garcia v. Washington State DOL are legitimate. If you received one, you have until October 9th to file a claim at wadoldataBreachSettlement.com. If the court gives final approval to the settlement, payments of up to $7,500 will be sent out in October. If you have a story you'd like verified, email us at verify@krem.com.
The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration says this is what a deadly dose of fentanyl looks like, smaller than the size of 1 penny. Today, state and local leaders came together to talk about how to stop all amounts of fentanyl, even as small as this, from getting into the hands of Washingtonians. Tuesday, Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers invited multiple Eastern Washington agencies to discuss the threats of fentanyl and preventing its distribution.
We have a real problem that's impacting our community.
The state representative says drug smuggling at the border is putting people in Washington at risk.
The continued increase in the amount of fentanyl that's coming into the United States and making its way to places like Spokane and Colville and throughout this region.
One Border Patrol agent says 19,000 pounds of fentanyl has been seen at and between southern border checkpoints since the start of the year. He says 1 pound of fentanyl equals about 600 to 700 pills.
They're coming up the I-15 and the I-5 corridor to our backyard.
When talking about fentanyl, it's impossible to ignore the damaging effects of drug misuse. Mayor Nadine Woodward says too many people in our community know how deadly fentanyl can be.
If it's not fentanyl, what is it going to be next?
2 years ago, a family member in my family died of fentanyl poisoning. There are more of us that have been impacted by this than we realize. And so my heart goes out to those families because we've suffered the same pain.
A large talking point was making sure children know how to protect themselves from fentanyl. People walked away from the table advocating for more drug education in our regional school curriculums. Representative McMorris Rodgers is one of over 50 state leaders co-sponsoring the Halt Fentanyl Act. Under that bill, being caught with 100 grams of fentanyl or more could trigger a 10-year minimum prison sentence. That bill passed in the House last month. In the studio, Janelle Finch, KREM 2 News.
I'm at the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, and I had the chance to speak with people that knew Ivan Bush.
Ivan Bush passed away on Sunday. Bush's oldest daughter says it hasn't quite sunk in yet.
My dad was the ultimate girl dad, so he was our biggest cheerleader. He taught us so many life lessons.
Shayla Bush Harris grew up in Spokane watching her father uplift Spokane's Black community.
We attended the MLK marches and saw just how much of an impact he had on the community to bring so many different types of people together.
Bush lived in Spokane for nearly 40 years. He was an active civil rights leader in the East Central neighborhood. In that time, he founded the Martin Luther King Memorial Center and started the annual MLK March.
People just knew him as the person to go to when they were struggling with certain issues.
Frida Gandy is a director of the MLK Center. Over the past 12 years, she's seen how Bush's initiatives impact today's generation.
Just having a place, you know, not only for just African American kids to go, but just a safe place for kids to participate in different activities.
Others know that Bush's legacy will live on in Spokane's community. James Watkins was just a toddler when he met Bush.
He cared about his community. He loved his community, but he sacrificed for his community, and I think that his legacy will live on simply because of those things.
Bush helped everyone no matter what they looked like or who they were. Shayla hopes the lessons her father taught never go away.
He may be absent from this earth, but through his life lessons, he continues to live through us all.
Bush was 73 years old.
I'm told that a memorial service is planned for Ivan Bush that will be held here at the Martin Luther King Jr. Center by the end of next month. In Spokane, Nathan Hyun, KREM 2 News.
A portion of Spokane Valley City Hall is being demolished and reconstructed less than 6 years after this building was finished. The mayor and council members are still unable to use their own council chambers. An exterior wall began sinking and parts of the building started to crack. In 2020, the city filed a lawsuit against Meridian Construction, the main contractor, along with several other companies. That matter is still ongoing.
It needs to be fair for the city of Spokane Valley taxpayers. We really need to recoup any expenses that have been incurred as a result of necessary repairs to get the building that we expected to get when we made the initial investment in City Hall.
Repairs could cost upwards of $5 million. The city has brought in Garco Construction to make those repairs and look at what else needs to be fixed. The exterior wall of the council chambers is being demolished and reconstructed. That should be finished by this fall. 10 interior doors also need to be reframed and replaced. Roof and attic work may not be complete until next summer. So tonight, council members receiving an update on all of that at tonight's meeting. And if the city and those former contractors cannot reach a settlement out of court, the case will go to trial. Right now, that's scheduled for August of 2024. Reporting in Spokane Valley tonight, Kyle Simchuk, KREM 2 News.
I'm by Comstock Park, where just 1 week after school ended, the city put up these 20-mile-per-hour speed limit signs. And this is your sign to slow down this summer.
20 miles per hour, that's how slow you need to go when driving past Spokane City parks this summer. These 6 parks across the city are where you need to slow down for the summer.
These are just parks that have been identified as the busier, more popular parks that are along busier streets.
Here at Comstock Park, many people couldn't wait for the change.
I think it's terrific. I wish more people were aware of it.
Colleen and others hope this seasonal speed limit near city parks will keep children safe.
A lot of kids on bikes and skateboards, and little kids who aren't paying attention, so 20 miles an hour, that's plenty to go around a park.
The Spokane Police Department says they'll be enforcing the new speed limits. Violators could face a fine of a couple $100s or more, depending on their speed.
When we lower the speed limits like this, it gives drivers a lot more time to respond if something like that happened, and it could prevent an accident.
The lowered speed limit near parks will be in effect from now until September 5th. For Chester Casey, that means safer walks to Comstock Park with his dogs. In fact, he's had close calls in the past.
I have no intention of stopping. My little dogs here and I have almost got run down in crosswalks here at Comstock.
The city says they'll remove the signs before school begins this fall.
The city says that the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit signs are only seasonal for now, but they could revisit making it permanent depending on community response. In Spokane, Nathan Hun, KREM 2 News.
Really loud.
Really loud.
Really loud.
A little noise can't take away from the excitement that's about to come. Cameras out, earplugs in, and an early morning drive from Newport to celebrate a piece of history in our country.
So we got up at 3:30 this morning to come down.
Alicia Rodell and her family had a front row seat to it all. The Fairchild Air Force Base rolled out several of these throughout the morning, honoring those that came before them.
So it's something we take for granted nowadays, especially the air crew, because it's so normal for us. But 100 years ago, I can't imagine having some biplanes and literally a garden hose to pass gas.
What's so normal for these military officials is mind-blowing to the average spectator. Inspiration for young recruits.
I want to go save some people.
One base responsible for flyovers in 7 states in just a matter of hours.
So to bring them out here this morning, be right next to the runway to see the elephant walk and the departure, I would be, if I was them, I'd be really motivated and happy to be here.
For Alicia, motivation is exactly what her son, niece, and nephew took away from the up-close opportunity. Watching these KC-135 Stratotankers take off in front of them is something they'll take away as cherished memories, no matter how loud it was.
It's a rare opportunity for them to be able to see something that close and to be able to experience that firsthand, so it was pretty important.
From Airway Heights, Brandon T. Jones, KREM 2 News.
Here at Green Bluff, cherries are back. I'm at Beck's Farmhouse, who tells me that they're ready to start picking cherries as soon as this weekend. Walk into Beck's Farmhouse and you'll see large bags of cherries.
This tree that we're looking at right now, it was a Rainier cherry tree.
It's a cherry that's a little lighter in color.
This year, they're out earlier than usual.
It was a little shocking, actually. We weren't quite ready to say we were going to be ready to pick this early.
Owner Todd Beck says they've only started cherry picking in June a couple times before over the years. It's perfect timing with the holiday weekend.
So nice this year that people are, in their mind, it's already midsummer. It's time to be picking the stuff, and it's time to be out in the fields and getting their fruit.
Some farms in central Washington have had delays to their crops. This is because of the weather from fall and winter. The trees are still recovering, but there has already been improvement.
Thankfully this year, growing conditions have been much more ideal. Mother Nature is our members' silent partner.
Tim Kovis from the Washington State Tree Fruit Association says last year was the smallest cherry crop in 14 years. But this season, he's expecting a 50% increase in cherry production.
Into retail, folks will probably begin to see more and more cherries.
Still milk growers in Yakima have also noticed the same trend. Their cherries were delayed about a week, but they are now right back on track. They don't foresee a drop in profits or much of an impact to customers this season.
I was surprised actually when we came out here today and that they were already going full tilt on cherries, because usually it's a little later than that.
Another Green Bluff farm is noticing an abundance of cherries.
I'd say we have a very heavy crop this year. So we have 100%. We're rocking this year.
Rhonda Bosma runs Cherry Hill on Green Bluff. She says this year's harvest already looks better.
It just worked out really good this year. We didn't have a lot of rain when they were blooming here up on the bluff.
Washington's cherry season is projected to go into August this season. Todd Beck says that once cherry picking starts, Beck's farmhouse will open for public cherry picking for about the next 3 weeks. In Green Bluff, Nathan Hun, KREM 2 News.
Thank you for joining us here on KREM 2 Plus for a look at some of the biggest news stories of the past week. For the most current news throughout the weekend, you can watch our latest newscast right here on KREM 2 Plus. Just look for them in the bottom navigation menu. I'm Tim Pham. Thanks for watching.